there is a real cyber war that is happening behind the scenes that we don't even know anything about. It's the asymmetric nature of cyber warfare that makes it so dangerous. And what's really scary about this is they don't have to be a Russia level. They don't have to be a China level. What makes cybersecurity and hacking so scary is it's really limited only by your imagination. An attack on the civilian infrastructure, no doubt, will have an impact on any infrastructure that is dependent on it. The most dangerous part is during the crisis, because that's where panic, shock, chaos is at its highest. My biggest fear is not that the internet will be down. My biggest fear is that the internet will be up, but controlled by the adversary. The chaos that will ensue is unfathomable. All adversaries have hidden probably Trojans on each other's system, and they're waiting for some sort of a day where they could leverage these assets in a nefarious way. The moment you normalize the use of these non-conventional assets, the world will never be the same. You've just opened Pandora's box. We already have the Trojan horses on our shore. With the advent of AI and quantum computing, it's absolutely terrifying. AI will hack us in a way that we could never, ever imagine.
I just wanted to ask you, because you brought up the idea of hardware. And is it possible that these Trojan horses, this dormant hardware, firmware that is just waiting for the command to either like self-destruct or create chaos, or like, is there some dormant malware on here that's just waiting for World War III to start, that it's going to start doing crazy shit?
Well, listen, like I said, in cybersecurity, it's hard to give absolutes on certain things. I could say that the capabilities are there. Mm-hmm. The capabilities are there, and you don't have to have it dormant. You could access it at a later point and download it at certain. One of the best cybersecurity organizations on the planet is in Canada. It's actually called the Citizens Lab at University of Toronto. Phenomenal people. They do great work supporting human rights activists, supporting all sort of groups that do their best in terms of freedom of speech, and just very worthy cause, very good people. They were the first to identify what they call a non-click hack, meaning in the past, somebody would have to send you something to your mobile phone, and you would have to be tricked into clicking on something, right? A message, you want $1 billion, click here, please. Okay, so it needed your interaction. What they identified, I think, with the Trident 30-day, they were using 30-day hacks in one go, where it's no click, meaning we will hack your phone, you don't have to do a thing, and we own your phone. So then can we, at that point, download something on it? And this was 2016, I think, if my memory serves correct, 16, 17, something like along those lines. So you don't have to have it here now, because you could be taking a risk of tipping your hand or somebody discovering it. But if you already have some sort of a software that's able to do this at a later point, then voila, you could do anything. And this is the problem, is we're always playing catch up. Like this 0 day, and by the way, let me just define 0 day so that people are familiar with the 0 day.
Please do.
0 day is you could apply the concept of 0 day, like when they say in pandemics, patient zero. So 0 day is the first day a new hack appeared. We've never seen this before. That's how you could think of it, is like, this is new. We've never seen day. So today is day 0 that this hack has been documented. And some of the state actors or sophisticated actors could use a combination of 0 day hacks. They could use 3, 4, like in the Trident case that the Citizen Lab uncovered. They actually used 3 different 0 days to achieve what they wanted to do.
So just
and of course now that's
to help people understand 0 day, it's a vulnerability in a system that it maybe even the because as far as I know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, people buy and sell these on the black market because they're so they're like a vulnerability that hasn't been discovered by the creator of the program, like an open door or something. Is there a metaphor that people can use to understand this?
Yeah, sure. A 0 day, you could think of it as It's a hack to exploit a newly discovered weakness or vulnerability in a system. So somebody discovers that, for example, let's use a house example. Somebody discovered that the rear window is open in this house, right? Now I'm going to design a ladder with the right height to reach that window to allow anybody to go into it. Now I'm going to be selling the information about the window and the ladder, how to get into that window. So a zero-day hack or vulnerability is basically you are the first to identify a weakness and provide the tool to take advantage of that weakness. And it could be sometimes just identify the weakness and give it to somebody who's developed the and you're absolutely right. There are conventions worldwide, some of the strangest things you'll ever go to, where Intel people from all over the world and corporate people, and some of them are white hats, some of them are cybersecurity experts, they're going around, and you have these very interesting characters that have 0 days, and they're trying to create a marketplace, and there are stories, legendary stories of cash bags, just being exchanged, and an auction for what kind of 0 day you have. There's a few stories that you could look online for. I forget, a reporter, was it Wall Street or Washington Post, one of the big reporters who went down to Argentina. And what she saw just shook her up because she couldn't believe how many people
I think
were
I read
there,
her book.
how thriving. Oh, yeah, okay. How thriving that market was. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And basically in Argentina, they didn't want to talk to a reporter, but that community was very active. And I'm not saying anything about Argentina. I'm just saying that event, and remember, a lot of shady activities take places in very legal and legitimate events. DEF CON being one of the biggest in the world where, it's like the hackers Olympics type thing. So we were barely scratching the surface of what these new technologies mean to us and what is the convergence of these technologies. I mean, what makes these technologies so powerful is their cumulative capabilities. And they're uncharted territory. I mean, we have not been able to really fully appreciate their power. And that's why the operative word is resilience, resilience, resilience. Because for people that are interested in security or securing themselves and securing their family and loved ones, the only thing you could do about this is you have to adopt your own, personal security hygiene. You have to improve your own security. You have to provide redundancy. Give an example, personal example, right? So you have GPS. I don't have GPS in my cars because I make sure these cars don't have any of these funny things in them. I don't have a Tesla.
Just to interrupt you there for a second, people should know you're a prepper with a bunker for a reason.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, there's a very good reason. The more you know, the scarier sometimes it gets. Really, it becomes a little sometimes too stressful. But when you have a car, let's say, for example, and you're dependent on GPS, assume what if GPS doesn't work? Well, in the car, you have to have a redundancy, meaning you have to have, let's say, a satellite communicator. Well, let's say that's not working either. Then, you have to have maps, detailed maps. You have to have a magnifying glass with light, so it could operate at night, for example, and you have it in a waterproof pouch, and you have it in your car. So you don't panic that you don't know how to get home. And of course, a compass. Forgot compass. So all that will be one package in your glove compartment, as an example, right? So I'm somewhere, all of a sudden, all the electronics freaked out, nothing is working. Okay, fine. I know how to get myself back home. That's just one example where basically, if you would have an analog or a physical redundancy for everything that you do electronically, you will not feel as stressed. And you have to rehearse that with your loved ones. You have to rehearse that with your community, rehearse that with your family. I mean, one of the things I loved when I was listening to one of the Andrew Bustamante shows, and I don't know if it was with you or on his own podcast, where he was talking about how he was teaching his kids passwords, how to identify when they're traveling, that you don't have a bad guy at the door, how to have passwords and whatnot. These type of practices that are outside of technology, while they're old-fashioned, they really, really, really could be important in security. And so if you apply the same concept, like you had a great episode once about your wooden heaters, right? If the power grid goes down right now today, are you able to survive? Are you able to heat your house in a country like Canada? Is pretty cold, so I mean you have to account for that, right? The water and so on. So a cyber attack of the magnitude that the World Economic Forum is talking about, unfortunately, is extremely realistic. Its full implications and impact is so massive that it, honest to God, cannot be quantified in any meaningful way. But you could rest assured it's going to be bad. I mean, if the World Economic Forum scenario applies, what they're telling you in plain English is your ATM card may not be working, your bank account may not be working, you can't go to pay fuel at the gas station because most of them are not equipped to take cash and keep a ledger or issue a receipt for it. They don't have manual physical receipts, for example. If you want to go to a pharmacy to get your medicine, well, all the medical records are on a computer. So you have to sit down and visualize all this and run practice a zero technology day. Literally go home, which I do, and flip off the circuit breaker completely, and you have no phone. Now let's see what you could do, right? So, and you will constantly discover things. I mean, this is the thing about prepping and about resiliency is it's a lifelong journey. It's nothing you do. It's part of your life, and you just do it, and it makes you feel better the more proficient you become at it. But cybersecurity and cyber threats, a cyber attack, should definitely be, according to the World Economic Forum and many other organizations, not just them, but they are very active in this field. It's one of the top 5 threats in 2024, 2025. So that's a very, very high percentage. And I think since we have a lot of adversaries and the world is becoming more precarious, it is extremely prudent to take into consideration that, yes, there will be a cyber attack, a massive cyber attack. And then what can we do about it? So when it happens, we're fully prepared. I mean, that's really the thing, because it will affect us in more ways than we could imagine.
And it would be very enticing for a government, say, if they were failing in the polls, if they wanted to create some sort of event, it'd be much easier to do a cyber attack and attribute it to somebody else than it would be to actually do a physical attack. And me, I don't tend to dabble in too much conspiracy theory, but this would be an ideal situation that one would conduct a false flag operation in order to usher in whatever sort of plan they wanted to. What sort of these 0 days, let's say we're talking about a theoretical World War III cyber war scenario. Is it safe to say that nation states have at their disposal an arsenal of 0-day exploits just waiting to be deployed? Is there have they amassed an arsenal of cyber weapons that have yet to be put into use? Or maybe if you could just illustrate a bit how that might play out.
Sure. I mean, again, in cybersecurity, it's never prudent or really possible even to give absolutes. However, I'll tell you that if I was advising, let's say, the U.S. government, I'm an American, so let's say I'm advising the U.S. government, I would absolutely advise that they would have to have an enormous arsenal of 0 days and a combination thereof. And absolutely to sit on it without saying a word, because that's the problem with 0 days. Once you use it once and it's out there are professionals that in a relative period of time, they'll be able to mitigate it or find a way around it or whatnot. So to answer your question is, prudence dictates that just like weapons of mass destruction, that you have an arsenal, here you would have to have a formidable arsenal that you would have to keep, and you would have to continue to improve. And at the same time, you have to try to find out as much about your opponent's arsenal as humanly possible. So it's almost the same playbook that we had in the Cold War, in the arms race, except here it's much more nefarious, because it's almost impossible to track. With nuclear weapons, I mean, there were treaties, and you could easily have inspectors that go and visit the facility, or satellites could verify the silos, where are there, the spots, the plumes, the heat signature. I mean, there were radiation signature. There were myriad of solutions that could make a country feel like, okay, I have an idea of what's going on. With cybersecurity and hacking and these zero-day hacks and these technologies, it's a total black box. I mean, it's almost impossible to track because you don't need much of a footprint. You don't need huge manufacturing facilities. You don't need, and that's what makes it so dangerous and so concerning. It's the asymmetric nature of cyber warfare that makes it so dangerous. So, to answer your question in short, is you would have to assume that your adversaries have that. And you have to find a ways, like it's a chess game. You have to find a way to counter that and mitigate it, at the very least mitigate it, if not negate it altogether.
And what about the internet? Could the internet itself somehow be taken down? I'm probably asking you a lot of elementary questions. What is and maybe bundled in with that question, you could describe what a distributed denial of service attack is, and maybe the difference between different cybersecurity threats like viruses, worms, and the overarching question is, could the internet someday just stop working?
The answer is yes. The short answer, yes. And there are a lot of ways of doing it. The most likely scenario would be, I mean, you could do it through hacking in multitudes of ways, and it's been done before on regional levels. But most likely, in case of a world war or conflict, they will go after the cables. They will go after the underwater cables. They will go under the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, the piping. I think that would be number one. That's why services like Elon's Starlink are becoming so valuable in the future, because I think the normal, what we call plumbing, the normal copper lines, the normal internet lines, those are going to be compromised, you assume, in a case of a conflict. It will be a little bit harder, depending on who your adversary is, to go after satellites. Because, I mean, to go after satellites, you have to have really advanced state actor like Russia, China, somebody of that ilk.
And there's a limited bandwidth there too, right? So,
so far, well, see, here's the thing. This is what makes technologies like 6G so dangerous. Is in the future, once you have, like with anything else, what Starlink is already achieving was considered to be just unthinkable in a cost-effective way just not that long ago. And look how far they've come just in 5 years, really. So more countries might be doing this that we don't know about. I mean, for example, we don't know anything about the satellite activities in Russia. We don't know anything about the satellite activities in China outside of what they issue a press release to let you know. And it will be reasonable to think that that would be just the tip of the iceberg of what they're telling us they're doing. So, but to answer your question in short, is sure. The internet, there are ways of probably state actors could find ways to tamper with that. As far as DDoS and different type of malware, viruses, worms, and whatnot, DDoS, when we started talking about that what is information security or cybersecurity, I said the three pillars are CIA, right? And the A was for availability, the availability of the resource that you could access. A distributed attack, a denial of service attack, just a normal denial of service attack, is basically you trying to block one person. Like, give you an example, a house, right? So the house, you have a door and you have a guest coming through the door. Okay, so they knock, you open, shake hands, go in. Okay, that's a security protocol, let's call it. So that's one person going in. If somebody wants to deny access to that house, they know that, okay, you could get, let's say, 60 guests per hour through that door. I'm going to send you 60,000. That door is clogged. So, and now I really want to be mean. So I'm going to do a distributed denial of service. So I'm going to turn 500,000 computers around the world into what they call zombie computers or slave computers. And they could be controlled by a single person with a dashboard. It's called usually the master. And these computers are called zombies or slaves, right? And now I'm going to send you internationally guests from all over the world. I'm going to send you 10 million guests to your doorstep. Nobody's getting through that door. So a denial of service is basically you clogging the communication channel between your computer and the outside world, because there's a certain capacity for you to be able to receive communication. So if I send you 1,000,000 times that traffic, or 10 million times, or 100 million times that traffic, you're clogged. There's nothing you could do in terms of accessing the net. So you're shut down. So I exhaust your resources.
And how
And
long can an attack like that last?
Well, it depends on 1,000,001 factors. It depends on the type of the target being attacked, civilian versus military versus whatever. It depends on how well prepared you are. I mean, there are certain things that certain precautions companies and individuals can do to protect against that. But DDoS attacks are they're not difficult to conduct. And actually, there are packages to sell them on the market, unfortunately. And a distributed DDoS, a distributed denial of service attack, is very, very common, very, very popular. And how long they last is really a byproduct of a lot of factors, depending on the adversary or the hacker themselves and the target that they're going after. But they could last from a few hours to a few days to longer. I mean, they could destroy your network in a certain way, because sometimes DDoS, with a sophisticated actor, they don't come alone. They usually come with other type of malware that is intended. So it's part of a hacking plan versus just it's the plan. I mean, some people do it just, piss off somebody. I mean, there are a lot of ways you could do it, but most of the time with the sophisticated hackers, it's done in conjunction with other hacks, whether you want to bring in somehow get a malware installed or a virus or a worm. Or, I mean, it's part of a concerted attack. And a virus, of course, is a malware. It's a code that's designed to basically, the ultimate goal of every hacker is what they call reverse shell. Basically, take over your computer. That's the ultimate goal. So a virus is just it's a code that's able to achieve control over a system, right? The difference between a worm and a code and a virus requires your action. So I have to send you something, an email, you have to click on it, or a message or something. It requires your interaction. A worm within the code has a self-replicating code. So it just multiplies by itself. You don't need to be involved. And that's what makes worms so dangerous. It will attack that weakness in all systems available. And that's why worms propagate across the internet so much faster. I mean, they could propagate millions of computers in a day, or in hours, actually. So the big difference is a worm is much faster and doesn't require your involvement. A virus, on the other hand, does require that you have to do something, But most of these sophisticated attacks nowadays, they use a combination of everything. I mean, it's getting very difficult to be on the defensive. It really is. And
so a person
every single day there are new codes.
Yeah, so they would do like going on this metaphor a little bit more, the traffic jam metaphor, clog the roadways with traffic, whilst the IT department or whatever was concerned with that. They would be doing some other sort of crime where emergency services could not reach their destination because of the clogged roadways. Is it safe to say that the DDoS would be used as somewhat of a diversion so that other attacks could be compounding on top of that?
Well, it definitely can. It definitely can. And it makes sense because it creates a lot of chaos. Usually, one of the main concerns a hacker has is how to cover their footprint as they leave, how to exit, how to exfiltrate. That is usually one of the biggest things, because if they make a mistake there, that's where attribution happens. And that's where you could somehow track them. So usually, I mean, you would send in some sort of a virus or a worm, and you will do what bad guys do. And then you could use any diversionary tactic when you're exiting or after you exit to sort of cover your tracks in a different ways. But yeah, I mean, what makes cybersecurity and hacking so scary is it's really limited only by your imagination. And that's really very scary, because you have some people that are really very smart in terms of computer manipulation. and they could write incredible code. So the possibilities, and this is why I mentioned before that the offensive side has the advantage always over the defensive side, because you're reacting to something you've never seen before, versus the offensive side had plenty of time to research everything, to conduct their reconnaissance, to conduct their scanning of your network, to identify your weak points, even send some social engineers to work for you. If they want to get in, unfortunately, it will be very, very hard to keep them out. And usually the attacks happen with multitudes of things. It's rarely a single flavor or a single thing.
What are the potential consequences of a large-scale cyber attack on the military infrastructure of a nation?
Well, a very good question. I mean, I'm not a military expert, but I mean, in terms of governmental preparations, let's put it this way. So let's unpack that into two components. There are what they call military, or let's call it hardened structures, right? Facilities. And there's the supply chain. And that's what makes it dangerous. For example, I'm not going to get into the military because I can't speak about that in terms of what are their preparation, their defensive capabilities. But I will say something along the lines of, okay, so imagine you have a hardened site, site X, and you have site X dependent on the grid for power, the grid for water, and they get their food from the same food companies that deliver to Costco and everywhere else. So if there is a major attack on the normal infrastructure, by default, that facility will be affected in terms of its replenishment, in terms of its resources, in terms of what it could get. That's number one. Two, one part that was really accurate and leave the world behind was the site of the highways. That, I think, when they were showing the highways completely shut solid with cars, destroyed vehicles, now that site is impossible to access in or out, notwithstanding airplanes. You know what I mean? So the impact, because remember, troops are troops, they need to deploy. I mean, at the end of the day, they need to go do something, save lives, protect people, and so on and so forth. So an attack on the civilian infrastructure, no doubt, will have an impact on any infrastructure that is dependent on it, just by the domino effect or the butterfly effect. So the effect will be felt. The only question is going to vary, of course, from one area to another, from one site to another. If you're a site in the middle of Idaho or Montana or one of these big states, versus if you're in a very heavily congested, populated area, that'll be much more difficult. But it's something that needs to be completely taken into account. And that's one of the things I bring back to prepping. I don't want to quote one of our favorites, Gerald Celente, and a getaway plan, right? So you have to have sort of a plan of, if the highways are clogged, which is a very good bet that they would be, what's your alternative plan to get where you want to go without you having to depend on GPS? But to answer your question, is there will definitely be an impact.
Interesting you say that, because in the Ukraine conflict, in the run-up to it, it was later disclosed that the Ukrainian government didn't want to clog the roadways with people trying to escape the country, so they downplayed the threat because they knew that their military logistics would need to access those roadways in order to move around. So in a very similar way, I think that describes how you're saying that the civilian infrastructure is intimately interwoven with the military, and that they're drawing from the same well. So what about, I mean, on the topic of Leave the World Behind, because it's a great reference point for a lot of people. I think most people who've probably watched the channel, is that a realistic depiction of how this might play out? And do you think that there's certain things that the film got wrong, or would you say that it's a pretty accurate depiction?
Well, I mean, they picked a very narrow angle, which is an affluent suburban area outside of major metropolitan. at the end of the movie, they sort of showed you the difference between those two environments. In terms of how a cyber attack would take place, I mean, I think the remember there was an assumption there. The assumption there was the cyber attack there wanted a particular type of outcome, which is complete chaos. I'm afraid that aspect was accurate, um, if not even watered down a little bit. And let me explain why. When talking about business continuity, disaster recovery, when you're talking about prepping, I always break timelines into three components: the the pre-crisis, the during the crisis, and the post-crisis. The most dangerous part is the during the crisis, because that's where panic, shock, chaos is at its highest. I think the way they presented, and this is why I said it was like PG-13 version of what happened, is you don't need to have these flyers distributed. You could almost have an AI software that could custom build a decisive message and send it to each audience in opposites based on their profile. So if somebody likes vanilla and they get aggravated by chocolate or strawberry, well, you go ahead and you send them a strawberry message and vice versa. So AI could take your profile based on huge database mining, right? Big sets of data, and customize, weaponize that information to create a custom message. Now, in the movie, they were talking about flyers that were in various languages on the East Coast, West Coast. You actually don't need to do that with the flyers. I mean, you could reach everybody. You could go even itemize it per building, per household, per apartment, per. That's the problem with the internet. And in case of a cyber attack, I don't think my biggest fear is not that the internet will be down. My biggest fear is that the internet will be up, but controlled by the adversary. So they will be spoofing you and masquerading as this is the official governmental platform, but in reality, it's some country XYZ that is pretending to be who you are. So in case of the internet being down completely, at least that takes one less variable out of the equation that you don't have to worry about. But what worries me the most about a cyber attack is that aspect they talked about in terms of the fog of war, the decisive messaging, the manipulation of the masses. So if there is a big, massive cyber attack and the net is still on, be very, very, very cautious of the messaging on that net, because with AI nowadays, right, with deep fakes, they could create an alternative reality that has nothing to do with what's really going on the ground. So for me in that movie, that aspect about the flyers in multiple languages was a very strong signal of the fog of war, the disinformation, and the information warfare that an adversary could launch. But worst is to have them take on the personality or the identity of the local authority. That would scare the living heck out of me. So what I'm saying is it could be a lot worse than what the movie's showing.
Wow.
And
So
there will
above and
be,
beyond, above and beyond just you won't be able to know if the message that you're getting on your phone is from the government or not.
Listen, I mean, in World War II, there were famous, I forget the name of the units, the German units, that dressed like Americans, spoke with American accents, and they went on all the axis. I think this was after the Battle of the Bulge or around the Battle of the Bulge, and all the advancing American troops, these guys were act as MPs, military police, and they will direct them to ambushes, and they look like us, they sound like us, they talk like us, right? Well, now you don't need that, you have deepfake. So disinformation is much more dangerous in that environment than no information. Because no information, at least you maintain your status quo. You're sitting at your home or whatever. But disinformation, it could be guiding you literally into a catastrophe. It could be taking you to your demise. And that's why vigilance has to be so heightened. And that's why I wish that the governments will do more in terms of alternative emergency channels, because all these emergency channels, in theory, can be hacked. And we've seen in the Ukrainian war, we've seen many examples of major TV stations got hacked, right? Major radio stations were hacked, and then the adversarial messaging was put in. So what I'm trying to say is what scares me more is what they didn't show you. Because what they showed was really the PG-13 version of what could really happen. And then there was a line where he said, well, cash will be worthless in case the government are not around. Well, I mean, let's assume the government is definitely going to be around. That's not a problem. The question is, can you use that cash? Because at the end of the day, there are organizations and in our tech world right now, there are stores that can't take cash. Even if they wanted to take cash, they don't have the mechanism to take cash. So now what do you do? Right. So, and this is something to all the crypto bros, as you would call them, is remember your cyber wallet is nothing but one system element or one artifact in an ecology. And if the ecology is dead, that wallet, is a heap of junk.
Yeah, that's really fascinating stuff. Like, so a deepfake if there was a deepfake that went out onto the internet today, within a couple hours, it would be fact checked. It would be community noted. People would figure it out that it wasn't real, right? But a deepfake in that environment that you're talking about, where the internet is down and it's a one way, and maybe everybody's getting sent customized messages tailored to their political profile. Maybe Biden comes on and they put a deepfake on him saying that, Trump has attacked, or, Trump is leading a revolution or whatever. You could just imagine countless scenarios. But that deepfake scenario, you got me thinking, like, that is an angle that in that sort of environment where the fog of war is so thick, I think that's where it's most dangerous. Right now, if a deepfake came out with Putin saying, I'm going to nuke the planet, people would know in, an hour's time that it was fake or whatever. But you can't fact check something like that in that situation. And even if you had a few people who are critical of the message, the majority of people would likely fall for it. So what would that trigger within them to go out and do? Or, I could just imagine the social chaos that would erupt as a result of this. Like, you literally could start an internal civil war with the tools that you're talking about, with relative ease, it sounds like.
Well, to be honest with you, it's much worse than that. And let me explain.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
Well, let me tell you what. Because this is precisely why I mentioned that my concern is not that the entire net will be down, but selectively down. So imagine if you have an adversary that is able to disable and paralyze your security perimeter, right? Which was mentioned in the movie, by the way. If you paid attention, and I'm sure you have, and you had me, by the way, when you sent me that movie, you kept me up till 3 a.m. because I couldn't stop watching. But if it talks about how they disabled their defensive systems, right? That was one of the part of the line of the when at the end of the movie when he was explaining to him the 3-step process, right? So what concerns me, if the net is still on but hijacked, if they would go and disable the security perimeter, meaning you disable the police, military, whatever the guardian angels we have. Let's say you disable that, you completely put them in the dark, or you intentionally destroy their infrastructure, and then you start putting in these deep fakes out there. It is very, very, very disturbing, because the sky is the limit of what they're capable of doing, because you literally, what you have done, you've opened your house doors and you let every bad guy in, and now you could be, like I said, weaponizing the messaging, so you could send to each household a conflicting message than the one next to it. The chaos that will ensue, or potentially ensue, is unfathomable. I mean, it's unfathomable. And mind you, I am hoping to God that the powers to be, we have confidence in them as the powers to be, have war gamed all this, and have plan B, C, D, and E. And it's not, what got me into prepping was Hurricane Katrina. right? When it took 3 days to get water to the Super Bowl, to the I forget
Superdome.
the football stadium where
Superdome.
people, yeah,
Yeah.
Superdome, yeah. And then at that point, you're like scratching your head, and of course, so what I'm trying to say is this technology could be the ultimate Trojan horse if we're not paying attention to it, and if we don't have measures in place and secondary protocols to be able to handle a potential adversary that's very high tech. And what's really scary about this is they don't have to be a Russia level. They don't have to be a China level. North Korea, who knows? You know what I mean? It's such an open-ended question that no professional could give you with an utmost confidence that, oh, don't worry about this country or this actor or this whatever, right? So the possibilities are really, really endless, and that's sort of definitely something that everybody should take into consideration, governments as well as individuals.
The hack, or well, I guess it wasn't disclosed as a hack, but the Rogers thing that happened last year in Canada, where they're a main telecom provider here in Canada, and a lot of the ATMs across the country weren't working for a day or so. Do businesses have a vested interest in keeping it on the down low when they're hacked, or could hacks be occurring and we're not being informed that they're occurring for insurance purposes or whatever? Like, could they be trying to keep it from us, the true extent of maybe some of these disruptions? Because we're seeing this all the time, like where there's a airport disruption or a banking disruption and some sort of cyber issue, but they never really come out and say, oh yeah, we were hacked. Is that a problem that you foresee?
Well, I can't comment about Rogers at all as an organization, but what I could comment on in general is as follows. It is a very safe bet. Actually, it is a fact that the number of unreported hacks is way, way higher than anything that's been reported. That's just a mathematical fact. Uh, Organizations, unfortunately, have been less than forthcoming in disclosing their hacks. And there is a long history of this globally, not just in Canada or the US or anywhere else. Globally, there has been a long history of organization badly communicating or miscommunicating, or in some instances, falsely communicating events that could impact their user base. And that has gone on, unfortunately, forever. And in most cases, legally, there are very limited consequences, depending on the jurisdiction, the country you're in, to these organizations. So for them, they look at it as a business decision is legally, we don't have to say beyond X, Y, and Z, let's say, minimum. And yeah, we don't want to hurt our brand. So definitely it becomes it's a big concern. And most people will not know about this. And let me tell you something, in case of a telecom company, is absolutely vital, because nowadays, if you go to a gas station to use your credit card to pay at the pump, that's run on the same more or less backbone as your possibly internet at home, your phone. I mean, different countries, of course, different infrastructure. But the point is, so if a telecom company down, it could paralyze the economy, because most people right now don't carry cash. They carry credit cards, right? Or smart wallets. That means you cannot pay. You cannot buy anything. And the worst part of it, when these companies don't disclose, you are incapable of trying to protect yourself. That's why there are companies right now that offer you services. Let's say you give them your email, and they'll be able to tell you how many databases this email was used in and if it was ever hacked before, right? Because most of the data that's stolen is sold on the black market. And there are companies, security companies, that sometimes have access to these databases, and they're able to provide people say, yeah, well, your phone, your email was hacked X number of times and it was used, and so on and so forth. But it's a big concern, and transparency is a very, very big problem that big corporations have. And they should do a lot more. But I think they're more worried about their brand than anything else. I'll give you an example of an interesting hack. and how cybersecurity and personal relationships and social engineering all go together with telecom. So one of the most famous hacks in the cyber community is the LinkedIn hack. I don't know if you ever heard about this. LinkedIn actually is a very, very good company. And it's one of the reasons why people like me in the cybersecurity world, they keep their identity as protected as possible, because LinkedIn is one of the main sites people go for OSINT, for open source intelligence, to if they want to hack a company or hack an organization, they want to know who are the cybersecurity experts that are working with it, the resources. But anyway, so what happened is this engineer in particular, this hacker wanted to hack LinkedIn. And first thing he did was to go to the profile of the engineers and identify. Anyway, he found out where the guy lives, and he found out he has a computer at home, a Mac. And on the Mac, he partitioned part of the hard drive, and he was hosting a friend as a favor, a website for a friend as a favor on his partitioned hard drive. This is not his business computer. This is his personal computer, right? This guy was able to hack the friend's website, get into the partitioned hard drive, jump out of the sandbox, which is very difficult to do, get into the main computer, and sit there for a while till he was able to work out how to hack the communication into, because this guy was working out of his house, hack back into LinkedIn. He was able to finally hack LinkedIn, and then for the data he hacked in LinkedIn, he was able to take it and hack Dropbox. Now, this guy, you have to realize when a hack like this happens, it's all hands on deck. They bring in this huge, expensive team from different cybersecurity companies, and they start running all sort of forensic analysis. Anyway, so this kid, and that's what he was, he's a kid. He went to the cookie jar one too many times, and one time he went to access the system. He forgot to mask his IP, and actually he logged in from his apartment in Moscow. So they immediately knew who he was, and they waited till he was taking a lavish vacation in the Czech Republic in Prague and sitting in a fancy restaurant when they showed up and say, "Hi, how you doing?" But the reason I'm bringing up this story is here's a kid that tied up the resources of two huge companies. The cost is enormous. And he was able to do this single-handedly. Actually, he bought some of the tools online to hack, which is mind-boggling, to crack some of the passwords, crack some of the hashes of the passwords. And he went on shopping and living a normal life like nothing has happened. So the reason I bring this up, because when you're living right now in a society where the big corporations are not transparent to tell its users right away, you've been hacked. Dropbox didn't even know they were hacked till some of the cybersecurity companies say, "Hey, we're going to send you some names and emails and user ID passwords. See if you guys have been redundancy," because most people use the same user ID and password across multiple platforms, which is a huge cybersecurity no-no. So Dropbox didn't even know they were hacked till it was brought to their attention. And of course, these large corporations, and I'm not commenting on LinkedIn or on Dropbox as organizations, but I'm saying is most of these companies could do a lot more in terms of communicating with their customers, the hack, and be truthful about the level of the hack. And the problem is, once the data is out there and it's sold, you have no idea how many times it's going to be used. So I think people have to take prepping for hacking or protecting their digital footprint much more seriously than they do. They really have to take a cybersecurity hygiene as something that's very important in their life, just like locking their front door, just like locking their car door. They have to really develop some sort of habits, like they have to invest the time in developing complicated softwares. You have to go through your IoT systems, all of them. And most of the passwords there are just blanks or admin. It's the manufacturer's password. Most of them have never been changed. Follow good password hygiene, strong password hygiene. Turn off your systems at night so that the DOS attack would not turn yours into a zombie. It would not become a zombie computer, so to speak. Make sure you have good antivirus softwares. Make sure the patches are up to date, and so on and so forth. And be wary of social engineering. Trust your instinct. If people try to approach you while you're at ATM, or they're looking suspiciously at your electronic, whatever. I mean, you have to pay attention to that. Invest in a good shredder so that any financial instruments that you might have at home, statements or whatever you could shred and get rid of. Make sure your documents, important documents, are password protected. If you have the capabilities to have encrypted hard drives, by all means, you should do them. Some secure tokens, password tokens, very good, two-step, three-step authentication. I mean, there are a myriad of things that you could do to protect yourself. If you travel, and I've traveled to 36 countries, so I've been in a lot of hotels, don't use the free Wi-Fi. Just don't do it. Don't use the free Wi-Fi. And make sure you are paying attention to who's shoulder surfing you, it will, like I said, it's not convenient. You have to pay more because you have to get maybe a cellular card to log in and whatnot, but you're protecting yourself. It's also good practice to have a dedicated financial laptop where basically the important transactions are on this laptop and you turn it on only to execute your financial transaction. And then afterwards it's turned off. And so it's on and off just as a blip on in the matrix, so to speak. There are a lot of things that you could do to improve your digital security hygiene. Avoid hybrid devices like electronic locks, unless you're going to have them in conjunction with other locks, for example. I mean, the list goes on, and I could talk about this for hours, but there are a lot of things that people need to be aware of. Be aware if you're in the middle of nowhere and all of a sudden you see Wi-Fi or like network showing up on your computer, because where did it come from? I mean, just a lot of things to think about. And one of these days we could maybe, I don't know, talk about drones, which is a whole different dimension of cybersecurity and cyber hacking, and it's a whole different galaxy, so to speak.
Yeah, this Internet of Things is just a
scary
patchwork of vulnerabilities. I want to get your thoughts on certain technologies like the Cybertruck and Tesla in a second, but maybe
Sure.
Before we go there, can you give me your thoughts on the current state of geopolitics? I know you're pretty well versed in this sort of thing. How would cybersecurity play into? I mean, pick your conflict: Israel, Iran's capabilities, North Korea's capabilities. This gas station hack that just happened, maybe you can comment on. How are we likely to see these cyber weapons employed in these various theaters? And of course, we don't have time to comment on every one, but maybe you could just pick something that stands out to you as being a potential flashpoint for the use of these tools. Is the Iranian hacker, the hack on the gas stations, do you believe that that's a harbinger for what's to come? Is that just the first in a series of attacks, possibly? Who do you think might have done it? I mean, I guess we all have our suspicions. Maybe just if you could talk a little bit about the geopolitics of all of this as it currently stands and how we might see it unfold.
Sure. I mean, cyber warfare is just a reality nowadays. And it's an asymmetric weapon, meaning the weaker countries are going to try to throw all their resources into it because it's much more affordable than a high cost type of program, whether it's a new airplane or a new aircraft carrier or whatnot. So cyber warfare is a reality that is going to change warfare, especially in conjunction with drone technologies and robotics. And that, for me, is an extremely concerning point. Something like what happened with the gas stations in Iran, I mean, the culprit could be anybody who has a gripe with Iran. It could be somebody even insider. I mean, this is not a sophisticated or high on the totem pole type of hack that is considered for the bragging rights. It's something that any number of entities could have performed, and it's obviously somebody who's an adversary to Iran. I mean, to create some sort of instability there. Cyber weapons, I will almost venture to say that there is a real cyber war that is happening behind the scenes that we don't even know anything about. And in our past conversations, you and I told you, I'm always more worried about the hacks that are not reported versus the hacks that are reported. Because the hacks that are not reported are the ones where the 0 days are being used. And most of the hacks, I mean, once you hack a system, and you get a hold of it. Let's say somebody wants to, and I'm not going to mention countries, but let's say country A wants to really stick it to country B. Once you hack their systems, the smartest thing to do is just to be a persistent threat quietly. You just stay there and you're just collecting as much data as possible. And you're setting up for the day where you might launch an attack or whatever, but a cyber espionage is so much more valuable than a cyber attack because information is so valuable. So these hacks you never hear about, because I guarantee you it's going back and forth across all borders, which opens up a new can of legal worms in terms of, we know if one country fires a bullet at another country, we know what the international law says about that. That's crystal clear. There are rules, there are regulations. What right now, the legal system, the international legal system, the UN, is so far behind in terms of what constitutes an act of war, what constitutes an attack, how do you classify it? So to answer your question is, I have no doubt there's an ongoing fierce cyber warfare that's happening behind the scene. And when I say cyber warfare, you have to call it all electronic warfare. EW, because you have different spectrums. So the internet is just one small part. You have a huge electromagnetic spectrum that the war is taking place in terms of jamming, in terms of spying, in terms of interception, spoofing, all sort of thing. At the end of the day, one of the most famous hacks that happened that's highly well known is when the Iranians were able to hack a US drone and bring it down relatively undamaged. That was a huge hack. I mean, that was in the hacking world, like just mind-boggling. But nowadays, hacking get onto the actual battlefield. So you will see in the Ukrainian conflict, for example, where many Ukrainian operators had lost control of their drones because somebody hacked the drone and took control of it, or they use electronic warfare to shut it down. Cyber warfare, what scares me the most about cyber warfare is the aspect that you do not see, not the aspects that you see or you hear. But you could rest assured, all adversaries have hidden probably Trojans on each other's system, and they're waiting for some sort of a day where they could leverage these assets in a nefarious way. And I could see this becoming more and more as a guerrilla warfare tactic, which really concerns me. Because if you think about right now, let's say what's happening in Bab el-Mandeb right now and the Houthis, the asymmetric aspect of using a $1,000 drone. I mean, just yesterday, Politico published that the average was $2,000, I think, for a Houthi drone. And it was taking a $2.1 million missile to bring it down. I mean, mathematically, that's just unattainable. And that's where cyber warfare becomes an element, because if you're able to electronically take that down, then the cost is minuscule in terms of creating an electronic warfare bubble, so to speak. And the Russians have made tremendous progress in this, that battle cruiser Moskva that sunk in the Black Sea had some very, very advanced electronic warfare capabilities. And now that's where a lot of, for the first time ever, you're seeing people with funny looking futuristic type plastic guns, right? And you're seeing them across the world. You're seeing them even in private security sometimes, where basically they're anti-drones. And that's all part of cybersecurity and the digital ecology. Because right now, when you want to attack a target, all you have to do, just like you mentioned before, you have to attack a weak link in that ecology and use it as a penetration point, no different than when a virus attacks an immune system and it finds its way eventually to your vital parts and so on and so forth. Something very, very similar. In terms of geopolitics and cyber warfare, I think this is going to be the weapon of choice, because it's a poor man's weapon, so to speak, and it offers an asymmetric advantage that I can't think of anything else that could offer that kind of advantage. And especially when you look at a place, for example, like a country that is so technology dependent, it's almost you have to establish a reverse correlation or an inverse correlation between technological advancement and resiliency. The more technologically dependent, technologically advanced, more interdependent within the digital ecology, the more vulnerable you are, the more fragile you are. The less technology you're using in this world, unfortunately, the more resilient you are. So this is what makes cyber warfare against advanced economies such a scary proposition, because you could cause tremendous amount of damage to your advanced adversary, but they cannot do the same thing to you because you don't have an infrastructure to begin with.
Yeah. You're
You know
analog
what I
and they're
mean?
digital.
That's right. So the cost, and they understand, I think,
And this is
our
why it's so
adversaries
hard for them
under,
to destroy Hamas, because they're relying on a lot of these more archaic forms of communication. I'm sure they have sophisticated systems as well, but you got me thinking about the espionage component of this and the ISR component, in that there must be so much happening that we as the public don't see that is dictating, like this facade of Anthony Blinken or Sergei Lavrov telling us stuff. Like, we don't know how far removed from the true reality of what's going on the back channels this actually is. So it's almost useless information when they come on and they say, oh, this is our capability or this is our plan. Like, there's this ongoing cyber warfare, like you're saying, in the background, which is this battleground for information dominance. And what we're getting on the surface with Jake Sullivan or whatever, or, any of these, take your pick, is just barely even scratching the surface of how complex the actual dynamic is behind the scenes of this conflict. And I think, that's very disconcerting because, I mean, if I was the Houthis or Hamas, this would be it would be an advantageous position, knowing that your systems were that old saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Like you're saying, like this enhances our capability, but at the same time, it creates this huge array of vulnerabilities that we now have to deal with. It's just a very interesting state of affairs to try and analyze, but it's incredibly confusing also because nothing is as it seems,
Well, I mean, listen, I was having a conversation once with a very astute gentleman, and we talked about the concept of six-dimensional warfare. We know about land, sea, air, space, and cyber. Those are the five. The six, we were just throwing ideas around, and of course, there are many definitions people use for six-dimension warfare, which it's nothing written in stone. But my comment to him was, or the discussion we're talking about is, once you have the integration of quantum AI and robotics, all five warfare domains become one. And that we don't even know what it looks like. Because right now you could have a drone technically that could be on land, sea, air, it could be anywhere. You know what I mean? So it's a big challenge that is in the geopolitics of the Middle East. There are a lot of questions that are very difficult to answer. Is a less technologically advanced adversary a more challenging adversary than somebody who's technologically advanced? Does low-tech resiliency offer an advantage to a technologically superior foe? These are questions we didn't really ask before because the assumption was always the more high-tech, the better. But what we're seeing right now is you have an asymmetric aspect where you have very, very low-tech but resilient foes capable of asymmetrically posing a challenge to you against your multi-trillion-dollar war machine. That is fascinating. I mean, that represents a whole new set of problems, because if your opponent is able with $2,000 to stop a $3 billion battleship or deter it, and is able to slow down 50% of the global container trade with a $2,000 weapon, I mean, we really need to rethink a lot of the things that we have to, our assumptions. We have to re-examine our assumptions in what constitute power, projection of power, because these technologies are becoming more ubiquitous. They're becoming cheaper. They're becoming easier to propagate. And it's almost impossible to sort of control because the components are very cheap. I mean, China has drones. I've traveled quite a bit to China. And the drone technology in China is so far advanced in terms of incorporating into everyday's life. There's a company called JD.com, Jingdong. They were using drones to deliver medicine and to deliver goods to rural areas years ago. Years ago. They have a fleet, I think, from 500 grams to 500 kilograms of drones that could do delivery to most parts of China same day or the day thereafter. So the logistics dependency on drones is mind-boggling. And we have not made the adjustments yet between, and I go back to the triad of quantum, AI, and robotics. Those three are going to change the warfare. If you take a look at example right now, what's happening in Ukraine, and you see the progression of technology there, what would stop an entire tank division from being taken out by an AI-driven, intelligent swarm of drones? What could stop it? From a technical point of view, from a theoretical academic point of view, the technology is there. The availability of the technology is there and affordable. The scalability is there. The sensory capability is there in terms of whether it's thermal or night vision or radar, whatever. And the cost-benefit analysis is extremely compelling. So you have a $1,500 drone taking a $6 million tank. Whenever somebody is able to mass produce these things, it's going to look like an entirely different battlefield. It will be a scary battlefield. It's something that is closer to Terminator 3 or the last part of Terminator, where basically you have people underground and then you have drones running amok.
And I think
one of the
challenges is that if there is no countervailing conventional force, ultimately a nation's stocks of conventional weapons gets depleted, and then they're looking over at this arsenal of unused nuclear weapons and saying to themselves, why are we restraining ourselves in our use of what we know is proven technology that could potentially eliminate an entire mountainside where these Houthis might be holed up in? Why are we restraining ourselves in our use of this stuff? It seems like with this attritional campaign, one of my biggest concerns is that we're going to reach a point where maybe there is no cost-effective way to counter what you're saying, and we just capitulate and break out the big guns, and then all of a sudden we're lobbing tactical nukes back and forth, and it's become normalized in warfare.
You have just expressed one of my biggest concerns and fears, is that at some point, when the cost exacted by these asymmetric technologies is going to be too great to bear, and where we have exhausted known weapons, tactics, and methodologies to mitigate these threats, the temptation to bring out a non-conventional solution is almost going to be inevitable and irresistible at some point. And that is really something that is extremely concerning, because the day that first non-conventional item is used, the world will change. It will be a seminal event. It will be an inflection point. And just like Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a historical event that was etched in humanity's memory, the moment you normalize the use of these non-conventional assets, the world will never be the same. Because now you've just opened Pandora's box, and nobody will be able to predict what possibly you have done in terms of the unintended consequences. Because right now you just removed all constraints on all parties. So that I don't want to even get into it because it gets very dark and depressing. But you've just literally opened Pandora's box, and it means all non-conventional capabilities right now are, while
On the
at one
table.
point were considered unthinkable, now are considerable. And that is very scary proposition, because the day that single event happens, potentially the stock market will crash globally. There will be a panic, mayhem. It's almost impossible to predict what would the implications be, but you could bet it will not be positive.
I
And
have
that's
another.
where you could see, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, go ahead. You can finish
No,
your
and
thought.
that's where and that's where you're going to start seeing things that we have thought. In one of your messages, you asked me, "Do you think it will be a Mad Max sort of cyberpunk world?" I think we're going to have both simultaneously. In case of non-conventional assets being deployed, uh, parts of this planet or parts of this world is going to be cyberpunk. The other parts is going to be Mad Max. Um, and it's just really nothing. I mean, it will be so much easier if we are just to dedicate resources and invest a lot more money into finding mitigating solutions for these technologies. It's not impossible. It is doable. I mean, we have enough assets, we have enough resources, we have smart people, we have all the capabilities to put together a Manhattan Project and say, you know what, we're going to find a way to mitigate and negate all these quote unquote asymmetric threats. It can be done. It's just the problem is, unfortunately, the willingness for some reason at the decision making level has not been there. And you see that even in corporate world, where a CEO of a company or chairman of the board, they don't want to invest in a robust disaster recovery business continuity plan because they think the cost is unjustified till they actually need it. And then so the concern here is we are not addressing that. We're not defining the problem correctly. Thus, we are not devising the right solutions, and we are cornering ourselves, limiting our choices to only non-conventional answers that could have catastrophic unintended consequences. That's my biggest concern.
I have another hypothetical question for you. Just a couple more questions, because I know the
Sure.
communist cameraman
No,
is
no, take your
shaking
time.
in his boots, worrying about having to edit this all in 2 days. A hypothetical scenario: if AI is going to trump nuclear weapons, and if Vladimir Putin obviously had his quote attests to this, if there is a concern that a country is going to create something which is going to give them disproportional leverage in terms of their ability to wield power, would it not be in another nation's interest to try to interfere with that, or preemptively neutralize their capability to do so? And do you think that that's maybe happening, in the sense that, maybe there's this mad race that we're not even seeing Manhattan projects with AI, generalized artificial intelligence around the world? Could a country initiate some sort of first strike? It might not need to be nuclear, but is that what's going on with Taiwan and the semiconductors? Is that playing into, because we're assuming that at some point the AI is going to become so sophisticated that it might actually nullify nuclear weapons somehow. Like there might be some, I don't know, advanced system that just makes nukes obsolete or something. I mean, and this theoretical, but could there be some, could a nation feel so threatened by AI and the development of it that it seeks to act first by doing a physical attack? Or, does that question make sense? Or
Well, I mean, of course it does, because this is something that was war game during the Cold War, where all parties were thinking, at what point do we launch first to preempt a bigger threat later on? So it's a valid question that a lot of people have asked, and we have a lot of literature on war gaming during the Cold War. At what point the balance is, which is when is a good point to attack? But here's the problem. I go back to a point I mentioned earlier. In the physical world, let's call it the during the Cold War, the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact versus NATO. It was much easier to be able to visually or physically verify the other party's capabilities, right? You could see the silos. You mean in Cuba, we were able to immediately see what they got and the capabilities and pinpoint it and whatnot. The big danger right now is at best you'll be going off of an assumption. Because, I mean, is it mathematically possible that you would know exactly what the other party is doing? Possible, yeah. But is it probable? Is it at what percentage degree of certainty would you say, yeah, it's worth going ahead and going into World War III? Because that's exactly what it would be at that time. So that's a very difficult question to answer, but it is a valid question, and I guarantee you, every country's military and intelligence people are running sort of wargaming and simulations for this. But in terms of AI and nuclear weapons, let me tell you something. Every weapon system is managed by a computer. If you have AI and quantum and you're able, because, okay, let me unpack some things all theoretical. Most technologies today, most weapon systems we have are run by computers and computerized, digitized, and so on and so forth. Okay, that's an established fact. Two is all these systems are protected by encryption. And that encryption is encryption that basically, for the most part, we know these technologies are the fundamentals of these technologies. If somebody achieves a breakthrough in quantum computing and AI, and they're able to penetrate that cryptography shield, they have a first strike capability. In theory, I mean, we don't know. I'm not a military expert. We're just hypothetically, intellectually having a back and forth. But if we believe that cryptography is the shield that is protecting all the digital assets that we have, and there's somebody that's able to utilize a first strike capability, right, of quantum AI type thing, and they're able to somehow penetrate that shield, now officially they have a first strike weapon, theoretically. That is concerning. That is extremely concerning, and that should keep all the powers to be very, very worried. And that's what makes it very alarming to me, is because there's such, I mean, when I was doing certain research for a paper that we proposed to NATO, the data, the information around these fields, even from an academic point of view, is so scarce, fragmented, and opaque. So even from an academic point of view, to try to really get a handle on what does it mean, theoretically, what does it mean if these capabilities, robotics, AI, and quantum got integrated? What does it mean to us economically? What does it mean to us politically? The data, just the search, is so difficult to find information. So it's a well-protected secret globally. And your question is very valid, because if somebody is able to achieve that first, depending on how benevolent they are, they might decide to use it for a very nefarious purpose, to say, well, I won, and I doubt anybody is going to be able to walk away winners, but there's always somebody who's not playing with a full deck. And also, the other part is, we don't know if some savant in a country we can't even think of finds a way to do this. I mean, this is what makes programming and computers so dangerous. It's really limited, first and foremost, by your intellect and your intellectual capability. And of course, then the software and the hardware to follow it. But that's first, because AI is programmed by people, invented by people. And you have brilliant people all over the world being born every day. You have savants, a 9-year-old that, have a PhD in mathematics. So anything is possible. So we are living in that dangerous times, and the more complex the digital ecology that we're living in, the more digitally dependent our life, the more complex our digital ecosystem is, the more vulnerable we are, and the harder the fall, and the less resilient we are. And I don't think it's an either or. I don't think we need to live only analog, like cavemen, and I don't think we need to live like the what's the name of that cartoon? The
Futurama,
Jetsons, right?
Jetsons. Okay.
The Jetsons, yeah. So we don't have to be cavemen or the Jetsons. Uh, there could be definitely a middle ground where you have the benefits of technology and then you have also the peace of mind and comfort of resiliency. And we just have to really work hard at that and hope that the powers to be see this and act upon it, because we're living at a very precarious time where there is so many pressure points and flashpoints around the world, and it could take one wrong move by an entity or somebody to trigger the butterfly effect and to trigger a domino effect that could reach uncalculable consequences.
Yeah, that's very well put. And one final question here for you, because we got to
Please.
wrap this up. But I figure we'll end on a note that people is a bit more relatable. And I know you took
Okay.
issue with my Cybertruck review, and so we got to talk about the Cybertruck because I think it's a Trojan horse. I agree with you because there's so many possible ways, and we talked about whether or not it'd be a good, and maybe just in the context of preparedness, why in your mind is a Cybertruck a terrible prepping vehicle? Because I know, in spite of the
Well,
fact that there's not a lot of maintenance, you don't have to change any fluids. It's very, from a mechanical standpoint, it's simpler than a combustion engine. We can charge it with solar panels, and we can even shoot out the side of the window, and the car will drive itself. But what, what are your thoughts on why it's a bad idea?
first, Elon, if you're listening, please don't zap me. that's, that's number one. And don't cancel my Starlink, please. Now, having said that, have you seen Demolition Man?
Absolutely, one of my favorites.
Well, did you see what happened with that self-driving? But okay, on a serious note, it's this: a Cybertruck is a computer on wheels. That's really what it is. I think they were in one of the DEF CON's conventions. There was a challenge for who could hack a Tesla. I think that if you hack it, you keep it. If my memory serves correct. My point is this: if it's a computer on wheel, it's definitely hackable by somebody at some point. And once that hack is out there, it's easily to duplicate. So that's number one. Number two, if we're talking about SHTF type of situation, the last thing you want to be is inside a car that is, I will bet you anything, that software is like your phone. It has constant updates, constant patches. I'm willing to bet on that. And if you're one patch short, nobody knows what the performance of the vehicle is going to be. That's one. Two, you're in Canada. Once you figure out the cold temperature in case of extreme weather and the range it's going to have and how you're going to be able to resupply it, that's also something to think about. But for me, even if you have a just top of the line solar bank, I mean, just absolute great solar system, and you're able to power the Tesla, which would be awesome. I would be very curious if somebody out there could tell us if without these constant updates, if there's something that interrupts the satellite feed and the constant updates, would it be operational? Does it have a manual override? So from my side, in case of SHTF, the one thing I want is reliability and predictability. Is I want to be able to predict and know exactly what kind of tools, like when you're talking about the tools that you have and the high quality, you know they're high quality, they know you know how they will perform. Here, would I put it as my bug out car and my life depends on it? There are too many questions. And for me, I'm a threat analysis. I look at it as there are chances. Maybe I'll have one on my farm somewhere, okay, and I keep charging it and see till the computer updates stop, and then the car stops. So my biggest thing is it's a computer on wheel, and you don't control that computer. That's really the crux of it. That's really my biggest concern. Other than the privacy issues, and I'm not saying that Elon is spying on anybody or Tesla is, but if it's hackable, somebody could turn that into their jukebox. Somebody could be just, I mean, it's just from a security point of view. I wish, actually, I should research and find and send to you to do a security analysis of a Tesla truck. It looks cool. Don't get me wrong. As a toy, all for it. Go ahead. But in terms of SHTF, it will be definitely far, far, far from my choice.
You mean
So, so
it's
those are
not
the
gray
issues I
man
have.
enough for you?
Oh, that's the other thing. I mean, that's the funny part. Is here you are, Canadian prepper, busting out in a cyber truck. You're gonna be just a bullet magnet.
But it's bulletproof. I'll be
Yeah,
safe.
well, I'd rather that I drive a gray man car where everybody feels bad for it from a distance. I have one of my prep vehicles have so much rust on it that all my friends give me grief about it. I go, my friend, when SHTF happens, that's the escape vehicle right here because nobody is ever going to know what's in it.
Well, one of my concerns was that it has this electronic steering. I can't remember what it's called, but it's this power assisted steering, they call it. So what
that's
that
Demolition
means,
Man. Demolition Man.
yeah. So what that
Watch
means
the
is
movie.
that even if you're sitting there trying to turn the tires,
That's right.
if the government decides, no, your car's driving you to the police station, there's nothing you can do. They lock the doors, they make it so you can't do anything with the steering wheel, and it's game over. So I agree, there's so many, it's such a double-edged sword because on the one hand, we want to embrace all these technologies. We want to be a part of the system, have a foot in the door of the system. But as preppers, we also have to be mindful of the fact that at some point, all of this stuff could be used against us. And it's like,
and let me give you a bigger spoiler even. And this is actually based on real data. When a state of emergency is declared, it is very common. You can see this in Ukraine. You can see it in any conflict area. All vehicles are now commandeered under the power of eminent domain. All assets are commandeered by the military or whomever the state dictates that is a national priority. In case of a vehicle that you don't control, all they have to do is just press a button and say report to whatever point, right?
Or just turn it off so you can't drive it.
Emergency. Well, or that, right? We have to reduce the stress on the grid, for example. We have to prioritize energy use. So, in a state of emergency, I'm very old school in a certain aspect. You don't control it, you don't own it. It's really that basic. But don't get me wrong. I mean, I have toy cars, I have stuff, but it's not like they're advertising it as HDF, and I'm laughing. I'm like, unless you're from California, or I guess in Canada, you guys are California and Vancouver or British Columbia are pretty simpatico. Let's put it this way. And God bless both places, wonderful places. I have nothing against them, but I think in case of emergency, I am almost willing to bet that these vehicles will be commandeered for the benefit of the state in one way or the other, in one way or the other.
And
I
was just going to say in closing, you are currently located in Canada, correct?
I am currently in the lovely, lovely northern parts of Canada where, as an American, we always love Canada and just how nice the people are and how friendly and how clean the environment. You guys are lucky, fresh water, fresh air.
So
my lungs feel so much better.
Is it safe to say that you're bugging out up here? Like, is it that time that you're here because you're worried about shit hitting the fan?
Oh man, you put me on the spot with that one. No, I'm here because the maple syrup I heard is awesome. Well, I mean, listen, I'll be happy to answer that. I think Canada is a very attractive country for multitudes of reasons. In terms of SHTF, I mean, listen, you have plenty of land, so you don't have the congestions that other places would have. So there's no resource scarcity. You are 100% self-reliance in matters of food, water, and energy. And those are absolutely critical. Plus, the culture is very friendly. People are more community driven than other. And of course, that varies from one place to another. But overall, I think if there was going to be a global emergency, Canada is probably one of the best countries in the world to be in. especially if you're in the rural parts where basically you're able to just have enough breathing room and not feel congested. And my experience, I mean, knock on wood, has been phenomenal. I have great experiences with everybody I've met, and just been very resilient people, very just very friendly. You know what I mean? And very open minded. So I have absolutely I love the place. I mean, I visited Canada a million and one times before, but I think now and for the future. Also, I think from an investment point of view, Canada has a tremendous future because Canada is very resource rich. And I think eventually, from an economic point of view, and this is not an investment advice, I think Canada has tremendous future because it has every valuable natural resource that's needed to grow an economy independently and resiliently. You have gold, you have silver, you have platinum, you have copper, you have everything really. But most importantly, you have a lot of fresh water, a lot of areas to produce as much food as you want, and you have plenty of land where land is not going to be a constraint on anybody. So I definitely think it's a great, and not just that, but I know a lot of friends. I lived in Europe for 16 years, and I could tell you there are a lot of friends from the US and Europe that are looking to come in and invest in Canada and try to buy properties and just spend more time here because they're all in that retirement age. And you guys are lucky. And I know when I tell people where you're from, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, I have a lot of explanation to do.
Yeah, just saying it is a mouthful in and of itself. Well, I want to thank you for coming out. This has been incredibly informative, and as expected, you made me feel like a complete moron. So I appreciate it. I appreciate this has been a power punch of information, and I guess if anybody has any more specific questions, post them in the comments section below, and we'll see if we can get Cassandra back on the channel and to maybe break this down in a bit more detail. I would usually at this point in the video I would ask where people could find more information about you, but I think we're just gonna end it here and say thanks for coming out. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and I want to thank you. And I think what you're doing and your team is amazingly beneficial to people and helpful to people, and I think it's good karma. Thank you again. I love your show, and keep up the good work, man. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks a lot.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.